What if I were to tell you that there is a lost language to your nature that is intrinsically woven into who you are, and yet your mind is running a story that tells you it doesn't exist? This is something we found as our society has shifted away from the land. Essentially, the narrative that we tell ourselves is one of A plus B equals C. There's a much bigger narrative out there that all of this nature and all of your body is speaking in. There's a language that you know intuitively and intrinsically is woven into the fabric of who you are. It is star stuff. It is your star stuff. This is the language of nature, and this is the language that we are going to try to unpack a little bit today and talk about how do we connect deeper into this lost language of who we are. Ever since I was a little herbal sprout, the thing that made me the most passionate about working with plant medicines and holistic medicine in general was understanding and unraveling the code of the natural world, the code of energetics that is intrinsically woven into everything we see and do and touch. This is the language I'm talking about. This is this language that is coursing through our blood, moving through the universe, communicating with us and all of the species and beings and everything we come into contact with. And it's this language of energetics. You know, it's been put in so many different terms. You've heard it called prana or chi or vital force. Or if you look at the Jedi, it is the force. You know, it is this intrinsic woven fifth element that is inside of us and is part of us. And when we start to uncode what that is, we see that it's this map of energetic flow and movement. And everything communicates in this type of language. Every plant, every animal, every human, every species, even our planet is intrinsically woven in this way. And so what I want to do is just unpack that for you so you can understand how you're built like a fractal map of flow and energy, and how every little piece that you look at in your own life has a huge ripple on everything else. All right? So let's take a look at the fractal maps. So essentially, the subtleties and the patterns within life, practitioners of the old world would start to notice and understand. This is similar to the cycle of the seasons, right? Everything has this cycle, everything has this flow. And as the old world practitioners started to unravel this, they built maps. And these maps were encoded in their language, encoded in their communication, and a way of presenting this to those who weren't quite as astute and able to observe these patterns. But let's just take it to the very base, right? You know of things like astrology. You've probably heard of things like Chinese medicine and yin yang, and you've heard of probably the three doshas and the Ayurvedic medicine path. All these were languages to try and speak about the unseen world, to speak about the energetic flow, right? You might have heard of meridian channels. You might have even heard of iridology or ear reflexology or foot reflexology or palmistry. Every one of these is a way of uncoding the language that is trapped in, or is actually just showing up in the body in that way. Now, here's the trick that I learned that I thought was just brilliant. First off, just like every red blood cell, just like our planet, just like every other thing in the universe, just like a tree, just like an apple, you are not really this shape. This body that we have is not really who we are. It's not really the shape we are. Essentially, at an energetic electromagnetic level, we're a pulse of polarity that moves flow in and out. Your digestive system is the modified version of your piranha tube, which is a modified version of a donut shape, essentially. Every cell is like this, the planet is like this, like I said, through the North and South Pole. And essentially, energy moves through, out, and around, through, out, and around. And why I'm saying this is because when we look at all the diagnostic systems of the world, we see that it's all on the edges of this energetic flow that we can read the patterns more clearly. And this is where all the diagnostic tricks and the lost language is held. When I go into a forest, it's at the edges that I see the different types of ecosystem communication and the different kinds of plants working. When I come to the body, it's all on the edges that I can read what's really going on with the person. So that's why reflexology, pulse, tongue, eyes, ears, face diagnosis, body language, all shows up as a way of understanding an energetic signature of the person so that we can start to hone in and dial into this lost language. you are communicating very effectively just by the way you show up, so much more than you realize. From an energetic assessment perspective, I'd like to give you an example of how to kind of read into this code and to read into these languages. Now, it is essential to learn some of the mapping systems or to develop your own mapping systems, ways of observation and recording. This could be as simple as a garden journal. Oh, look, the plants come at this time of year. Oh, look, this happens at that time of year. But the maps I'm talking about are the diagnostic maps from various different cultures. So I'm going to just use a bit of a Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine and body awareness mappings to start to uncode what it might look like to have a health condition. So I'd like to give an example of a common health condition to kind of show how energetic mapping might be used. We're going to take the situation of Candida. You guys know what Candida is? Essentially, it is a yeast that can become overgrown within our digestive ecosystem. This is one of the big bad guys in the modern world because many of us eat the wrong kinds of foods that essentially grow Candida to an out of balance state. Now remember here, it's the out of balance state because Candida itself is actually a very healthy organism that helps us to digest certain food parts, but when it's kept in balance and check, then it's in a good place. When it's out of balance, it starts to create all kinds of irritability and mood swings and all kinds of stuff like this. So from an energetic perspective, if we are looking at somebody with Candida, we're gonna see a few different things that they have that are different from other people possibly. So if we look at their base meridians and we look at their edges of their energy and we start to read that, we can look in their eyes and we can see that most people with Candida will have a bit of a yellow coming out from the center of their eyes. The center is the digestive tract, and these maps work fractally, right? So center of my body is my digestive tract, all the way out to my skin, same map in the eyes. So we start to see this yellow permeating outwards. We look at the tongue and it's the same thing. It's a map of the body. In the middle of the tongue is where the digestive tract is. And so we might see a white coating on there. We might also see a swollen, scalloped edges of the tongue because this is similar to what we would say is damp spleen qi deficiency in Chinese medicine. Essentially, they're not digesting their food properly, right? This is where the Candida is coming in and creating this dampness inside of the body. So we'll look at the pulse and we'll see a spleen qi deficiency, which is the middle finger of the pulse. In this energetic map, that'll be slippery and kind of slightly depressed in that sense. So we'll look at all these different signs and start to articulate. If we get a lot of yeses, yes, 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 all these make sense, then we can see, oh, this person might have Candida. Another one might be that they've got an overblown second chakra, for example, and a depressed third chakra. So their sense of power, they're not as empowered, but their overblown sexual creative chakra is that creative energy that the Candida is thriving on, right? So all I'm trying to say with this is that you don't need to know these exact things. You don't need to become a practitioner. These maps are readily available, but in essence, when we start to see in the body the way in which it shows up, we can see subtleties and nuances that'll show some of the larger picture. Body diagnosis and energetic perception of our health in its state of balance or imbalance is one lens we can use to look at this energetic assessment and this lost language of nature. Another one we can do is start to correlate how our senses are connecting and communicating with the world around us. Essentially, a good example is, you see these salmon berries, they're in flower right now. Well, what else do I notice? Do I notice different types of bird calls at the same time? Are there other plants that I see in flower at the same time? Am I noticing a feeling in the air, a certain type of smell, a certain sense of light, the caliber of light at this time of year? All of these are ways I can start to uncode my perception to understand the language and the communication. Now remember, salmon berries don't speak in English, right? But they do speak. So as we become more aware and start to uncode and unpack the sounds, the smells, the feels, the connection to the natural world around us, we can start to build familiarity and start to build relationship. Now we know at this point in life, we are not separate from the petri dish. We are in the petri dish of life. We are part of the experiment. There is no observer. There is no scientist mind behind it all. There's no Oz behind the curtain. Essentially, we are part of this experiment of life, and we're in flow with that type of communication all the time. So how do we start to hear it properly, listen to it, and use it in our everyday tone? How do we do this? How do we unpack that? Well, it's about building relationship. These are not quantitative things, these are qualitative things. And so they require a certain level of relationship and dedication to working to that. If you've seen any of the work I do or the ideas I like to share, I often talk about this idea of nibbling on the world around us, connecting in with our sensory perception. This is how we build a relationship. It's nibbling, it's smelling, it's feeling, it's taking time year after year to build relationship. So, an example of this with the salmonberry is me and salmonberry have had many, many moments together. An example might be every time I pick one of these flower petals and I put it in my mouth, I am infusing that relationship into our connection. I am doing this every year, multiple times a year. And I can say, without having to be all esoteric and like, oh, hello, salmonberry, I just am like a friend saying, salmonberry, nice to see you again, right? Building that relationship. I'm also taking a chance every time to just observe new qualities of salmonberry. I wonder how these base little sepals will taste. Lick them with my tongue. They're kind of sweet. Wow, learning something new. Looking at the young shoots of this plant. Okay, where's the youngest leaf? Can I nibble on that? Is that different from some of these bigger, older leaves? It is. It's much tenderer, not as much fiber, right? These are ways I'm building relationship with salmonberry. Every time I go and pick one, every time I notice it along the stream, every time I think about it, me and salmonberry are having a conversation. And when all the indigenous peoples say, well, the plant taught me what it was good for, this is what they mean. They've been spending time just learning this lost language. And it takes practice, it takes time, but I assure you, it is something you may have to unlearn a few programs that are no longer serving you, but this is a program that is highly worth relearning, is this connection and this communication between you and the plants. It's not hard, it just takes a bit of time. So the invitation that nature always presents us is one to be the student, one to be the observer, one to be a participant and to exchange in this language, to open ourselves up to a whole new way of seeing the world, and yet something that is woven so deep in our bones. And that is, when I look out in an ecosystem like this, it's amazing to me to see how many relationships, how rich with life this is, how each old wise tree like this that has died still has so much life on it. There's life growing out of it in every different form. There's about 7 or 8 species, plus a plenty of bugs, birds, you name it, that have used this as part of their communication back and forth. Why do animals know what gets them sick and what feeds them? Because they're communicating in this way. It's something you and I can do. And I just want to invite you to this because I've been nibbling on the world around me. I've been having so much fun for the last 10 years, just deepening my connection to everything that is growing in this part of the world, that I'm excited to share it with you. And I think you'll be excited too when you start to just dial in and play with these plants. Don't be afraid. There's very few things that can kill you, and those ones are well written about. Most of this life, as long as you're astute and observant, is nibbleable. These little Saskatoon berry leaves, like normally you don't eat Saskatoon berry, but I know when it's young and fresh, wow, it's pretty tasty. Anyway, that's the invitation. This lost language of nature is not hard. It's not something that is all that complicated. It's essentially a fractal map of everything that is going on that you already know. So just take some time to start observing it and dialing into this communication. The invitation, as always, is to do this outside in the natural world. It's easy. It's a place in which you are always forgiven and there is no wrong answer, right? Spend some time in special places like this to just hone in your sensory perception and become a more emotionally intelligent, more empathically intelligent, more naturally intelligent being.